You're on the Top Facts channel, and we will show you the unsolved mysteries that inhabit the greatest mountain peak in the world. Scientists are still scratching their heads in search of answers, and out of the 15 video segments we have collected, they can leave you speechless in joy. Watching the first terrifying footage captured with a resolution of 2 billion pixels, a black disc-shaped figure hangs in the sky above the Himalayas. People claim to have seen an extraterrestrial spacecraft, and many skywatchers emphasize that it cannot be a drone due to its enormous altitude and the wind. Director David Brashears constructed a breathtaking photo with a resolution of 2 billion pixels, capturing the entire mountain range in intricate detail. This required assembling a mosaic of 477 super high-resolution photographs. The perfection of this image is breathtaking, detailed views of the world's highest mountain, stretching from the base camp where 500 climbers prepare for their ascent. This masterpiece was created in 2012, but it seems that the director captured something more interesting than just the mountain range. Analysis of the photographs by UFO observation agencies revealed the existence of secret underground bases in this area known as Zone 51, which is almost inaccessible on the border between India and China. Declassified files from last year indicate 7 UFO sightings recorded in this region since 1968. These are incredible and shocking revelations for those interested in aliens and UFOs. Mount Everest is full of supernatural phenomena. There are sightings of ghosts and other unexplained incidents. Renowned record-breaking mountaineer Pemba Dorji gained worldwide recognition for 2 reasons. Firstly, on May 21, 2004, he achieved a record-breaking ascent speed to the summit in 8 hours and 10 minutes. Secondly, on May 24, 3 days after his record-breaking feat while descending the southern slope, he stumbled upon a group of deceased climbers whose bodies were frozen in the snow. Dorji claims to have experienced something supernatural. He saw what appeared to be shadowy figures resembling spirits approaching him, extending their hands and pleading for something to eat. In reality, many bodies of deceased climbers aspiring to conquer Everest remained trapped in the snow, and the body of a mountaineer who fell due to an accident still hangs from a rope. Many believe that their souls seek peace and will not leave the mountain until the bodies are properly laid to rest. One can speculate that oxygen deprivation and abnormal pressure may induce similar hallucinations, but consider the actual statistics. So many corpses stranded above 685 feet, with new ones joining them each year, and the difficulties in retrieving them are unimaginable. Therefore, it is unlikely that the ghosts will leave the mountain anytime soon. Thank you. British explorer Frank Smythe came close to becoming the first person to reach the summit of Everest in 1933. His trekking group turned back before reaching the peak due to fierce winds, snow ice, and low oxygen levels. However, Smythe continued his ascent but failed to reach the summit, running out of strength approximately 1,000 feet short. In his diary, Smythe described an event known among scientists as the third presence. He wrote about reaching into his backpack for a mint chocolate bar during the climb, and the bar inexplicably snapped in half as if it was meant to be shared with someone else. Subsequently, the feeling of being accompanied grew stronger to the point where he no longer felt lonely. Similar sensations were reported by 2 other Englishmen, Dougal Hayson and Doug Scott, who were forced to spend a night in the vicinity of the deceased climbers' bodies. Uncertain if they would survive the night, they built a snow cave inside which there was insufficient air, and their shelter was precarious. They were hungry and struggling to keep warm. And then something inexplicable happened. Both climbers claimed to have felt the presence of a third entity in the snow, a being that not only provided the crucial warmth they needed to survive, but also gave them hints on how to stay alive. Similar presence has been described by many other mountaineers as well. In 1952, before the famous ascent by New Zealander Hillary, a Nepalese climber, Tenzing, a Russian expedition attempted to climb Mount Everest via the northern route the group optimistically planned to install statues of Lenin and Stalin at the summit. The expedition set up its final camp at an altitude of around 26000 feet for the preparatory stage, but subsequently disappeared without a trace. Official Russian sources claimed that the 1952 expedition never took place, despite an article by Evgeny Gibbonreiter in the Alpine Journal a year later. The Soviet Union denied that any climbing attempt had been made, and no information about the fate of the expedition was ever received on April 21st. 1952, the Sydney Morning Herald reported search operations in the Everest region. But despite numerous attempts, no traces of the expedition were found. 4 bodies were discovered inside a tent at the 4th camp on May 22, 2017, and the news spread throughout the Everest area. 3 days earlier, a rescue team had set out to retrieve the remains of a Slovak mountaineer who had died from altitude sickness. Later, it was revealed that none of the certified agencies had reported any missing climbers, causing confusion. How could 4 bodies suddenly appear there? When the news reached international media, the Nepalese Ministry of Tourism responded by stating that these remains likely belonged to last year's expedition. No prior reports of missing climbers had been received. It is perplexing, since climbers do not go incognito, and those who do not return are always sought after, or the case remains open. However, the solution has yet to be found, and these 4 nameless bodies remain one of the many mysteries in the highest and most enigmatic mountains located on the northern slope of the mountain near the peak. Those climbers who failed to reach the summit and perished are buried here in the Rainbow Valley. Everest's Rainbow Valley gets its name from the vibrant jackets that remain as colorful beacons in the graveyard. Despite its bright and cheerful name, this place is one of the most haunting. On the mountain, thousands of climbers set out for the summit, but only a few successfully complete the ascent, and every year only a limited number of people are found capable of admitting defeat and returning to the base camp, thus saving their lives. The stubborn ones who continue the journey often remain on Everest forever. It is gruesome, as their bodies are preserved in the snow, and the cold prevents decomposition, leaving them in nature's frozen morgue. And as more people perish, more bodies accumulate along the path to the summit. In the Himalayas, fossilized remains of ancient fauna have also been found. Everest has been standing here for over 200 million years, a large piece of land, separated from Africa and anchored by the mass of water that is now the Indian Ocean, formed a fold upon colliding. Tectonic plates pushing and crushing part of the land in Asia. This created the mountain range, and in front of it a shallow sea teeming with marine life. Emerged limestone was formed from the fossilized remains of plants and animals, while the land of Asia continued to compress, elevating the Himalayas higher. The Indian subcontinent has not completed its journey. It is moving with massive parts of the Earth's crust sliding over molten magma limestone, and marine fossils were first discovered here in 1915. There is scientific evidence that suggests there was once abundant vegetation and life, and if we refer to the Bible as not the universal flood mentioned in chapter 6 to 9 of the book of Genesis. Music. Scientists have learned to use satellite data to determine the increase in vegetation in remote regions such as the Himalayas. The expansion of this vegetation has raised concerns. It may seem wonderful that grass and shrubs can grow in these areas, but not everything is so optimistic. From 1993 to 2018, using NASA satellites, experts from the University of Exeter in the UK measured the spread of vegetation on terraces ranging from 13,500 to 19,500 feet above sea level. They discovered that glacial melting has doubled since the beginning of the century, with more than a quarter of the total ice reserves melting in the last 4 decades. The study suggests that the Himalayan ecosystem is highly vulnerable, and changes in vegetation are a worrisome situation for the entire planet. Foreign Everest has always attracted enthusiasts. Eccentrics and simply mad individuals but none were as extravagant as the Englishman Maurice Wilson. Since 1933, Wilson had been nurturing his insane plan to land a private plane on the northern slopes of Everest, leave the aircraft there, and then ascend to the summit alone. He first trained by hiking in Britain and learned to fly a British gypsy moth biplane, and then wintered in Darjeeling, preparing for the climb through fasting and prayer. Wilson wanted to climb Everest to declare his faith in God and believed that this mission would help solve global issues. In other words, he relied on faith rather than mountaineering skills to reach an altitude of 23000 feet above sea level. However, Wilson did not survive his endeavor, and his body was found by a British expedition the following year. The last entry in his diary was dated May 30th, and reportedly his body was found dressed in women's underwear. Although there are many uncertainties in this story, in 1960 Chinese climbers discovered women's high-heeled shoes in the same location. It was later revealed that Wilson was a transvestite and, before his Everest obsession, worked in a women's clothing store. Even if we skeptically assume that Wilson managed to reach the summit of Everest, he would have certainly perished on the descent due to inexperience, and what force compelled him to embark on the Everest journey remains a mystery to this day. It is widely believed that Sir Edmund Hillary was the first to reach the summit of Everest in 1953. However, many overlook the information that in 1924, two Englishmen, the obsessed George Mallory and his companion Sandy Irvine, were spotted through a telescope as two tiny black dots moving towards Everest at about 100 feet from the top. Unfortunately, they did not return, leaving it unclear whether they reached the summit or not. By 1924, George Mallory, an experienced mountaineer, had already participated in two Everest expeditions. He first visited the Himalayas with the official British reconnaissance expedition in 1921, which meticulously mapped the region around the mountain. For the first time, there were two experienced climbers on that team, Alexander Kellis and Harold Rayburn. However, Kellis died of a heart attack during a long ascent, and Rayburn fell ill and had to withdraw, leaving Mallory in charge of the expedition. He carefully explored potential approaches to the summit and likely became the first European to see the western slope. Mallory actively used oxygen cylinders to breathe in the thin air, and it became clear that Everest would never be conquered without this artificial assistance. After several attempts to climb Everest, Mallory proposed to take Irvine, who had good technical skills in handling oxygen cylinders, with him. Accompanied by 5 porters, Mallory and Irvine set off with a guide. While the guide surveyed the mountainside, a snowstorm started, and he called out to the men to return to the camp, but he himself could only stay where he was until the snowfall ceased. When he returned the next day with 2 porters, he found no traces of his companions. 2 sleeping bags were arranged in a T shape, indicating no trace. When Mallory's body was discovered in 1999, there were no answers, nor were there any traces of his camera, which could have put an end to the debate and determined who was the first conqueror of Everest. However, one piece of evidence could have been found. Before the ascent, Mallory told his wife, Ruth, that he would place her photograph on the summit. He carried the photo in his inner pocket throughout the climb, but when his body was found, the photo was not with him. So there is a chance to speculate that Mallory and Irvine were the first to reach Everest. Julia Stock, nicknamed the Swiss Machine, passed away in April 2017 while preparing for a historic climb he wanted to conquer the summit from both sides in a single raid. They say he had no equal in mountaineering, just like Michael Jordan in his field, Lionel Messi Babe, Ruth or Usain Bolt. Stock set his speed records and received awards for ascending peaks where no one had been before him, such as Tenkampochi and Annapurna. Stock was not only fast, but also technically graceful and daring, easily overcoming the most challenging routes, which earned him the reputation as one of the most experienced mountaineers and a daredevil. However, a fatal accident occurred with him on the western section of the tourist route to the summit of Everest, which he had previously climbed. For a climber of his caliber, it was an unfortunate mishap. After the news of Stock's death, not everyone immediately believed that he could lose balance and fall with a trajectory of over 328 yards, perhaps. Melting snow, treacherous ice, or oxygen deprivation-induced illness was to blame. It is unknown why the brightest star in the world of mountaineering faded his. Climbing partners were 300 feet away at the time and could not report anything. In any case, it remains one of the saddest accidents on Everest. Most climbers ascending Everest expect a miracle and even believe they will see the gates of heaven from the summit. However, British mountaineer John Griffiths and his two companions encountered an angry mob of Sherpas blocking their path and were forced to abandon the mountain due to these unsafe circumstances. Sherpas are an ethnic group living in eastern Nepal, and the town of Lukla serves as a gateway to the Everest region. Griffiths recounted that around 100 Sherpas behaved aggressively and hindered the climbers' progress. Negotiations were futile as the Sherpas covered their faces with scarves and started gathering stones to throw at the mountaineers. Griffiths stated that without the bravery of half a dozen climbers from Camp 2, he and his two partners would not have survived the incident. American climber Melissa Arnott, the only woman to conquer Everest 4 times, was also with them being experienced in the area. She warned that an attack was inevitable. Everything happened because Griffiths and his companions had a dispute with the Sherpas, thinking it would blow over. But after a few minutes, the Sherpas returned with an entire army. The conflict lasted for about 50 minutes, and the climbers felt they were being stoned to death. One of the climbers was injured but managed to survive, so Griffiths and his entire team had to urgently leave the mountain as the danger was too apparent. If they had stayed longer, something terrible could have happened. Mountaineer and geologist ecologist Jim Davidson was at Everest's Camp 1 in 2015 when a 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck. 18 people on the mountain lost their lives, and another 9,000 in Nepal and neighboring countries felt the impact of that fateful day, the worst in Everest's history in terms of fatalities. This was the highest death toll in a single day. Davidson was rescued from the disaster zone by helicopter 11 days later, during which he continued to save others. Colorado-based climber Davidson, over 50 years old at the time, decided to return to the mountain and reach the summit. A year after the earthquake, he trained for an average of 4 hours a day, sometimes up to 12 hours in the morning and late at night to minimize risks. Davidson achieved his long-standing goal, and from the top of Everest, he wrote to his wife, "I'm standing on top of the world, the highest point on Earth, Mount Everest. Lures and captivates with its beauty, but it is a deadly temptation. To reach the summit, one must traverse treacherous sections. Ice can suddenly collapse, and falling here is equivalent to death. When a massive avalanche occurs, it forms a huge cloud, a wall of ice and snow, and the storm can last for hours. Can you imagine the force of such an ice fall? When mountaineer McLeod was descending, it was around 6:30 in the morning, and a group of Sherpas was working near Camp 1, and at that moment the ice mass plummeted down the mountain. 12 Sherpas died on the spot, and 4 missing individuals were presumably buried under the snow. Rescuers immediately sounded the alarm, and helicopters evacuated the injured. It's a black day worldwide and in the world of mountaineering, because these guys work harder than anyone else on the planet. The last major tragedy occurred 18 years ago, claiming 8 lives when a group got lost on Everest during an approaching storm. The guide survived and helped several climbers descend safely from the mountain. According to him, in those moments, time ticks faster, and the count is in the tens of lives. More than 250 climbers have had no luck on this road, which is a result not only of weather conditions, but often incorrect actions. The question remains, how many more eager climbers will attempt to conquer the ruthless summit in the coming seasons? So these were incredible discoveries on Everest. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to see something similar, let me know in the comments, and don't forget to click on our previous release that appeared on your screen right now. Music.